All right. We are continuing on with Sri Nisargadatta's I Am That. We are in, I guess, chapter 24. I don't know what the number is, section 24. God is the all doer, the Gyani, the non doer.
Yes.
So God alone is the doer. So this is going to pick up right where we've left off our conversation, really. This idea that Sri Ramakrishna says that we have a length of cord that Mother gives us the play over. Uh, Although I think he was really just placating us when he gave that lesson. I think ultimately there's no free will. If God is the doer, if that's the final truth, there's no free will for us because not because we're denied free will, but because we don't really exist. We don't have an independent, inherent existence apart from the divine presence. And so even our doing is not our own doing. Our doing is God doing. It's just egoism that makes us take responsibility. And that responsibility is what becomes our karma. We own responsibility because we say we are the doer. We take responsibility for our action, and that places us squarely into the game, the checkers game of cause and effect. Where we start moving pieces around to have causes that produce a certain effect or a desired effect. And that is delusion. That's Maya. And so the ultimate truth is that we're unmoving, unchanging. And that's a hard one to buy because as long as your body mind identified, you're going to see change. That's all you're going to see. But there's something deeper than the change that's not changing. And that's a hard truth to know, not so hard to believe it, but a little more difficult to know it, to have an experiential flavor to it, because it only really happens when you really are successfully withdrawing from mind to a place that doesn't identify with body, and when that inner world, which is actually by nature unchanging at its core, um, in the deepest of meditations, that inner core is that which is unchanging, and that's the self that's the self. I mean, that's the permanent part of you that doesn't have an attribute, can't be described. And in that space, you realize that you are always in the moment, and the moment itself is unchanging. We've talked about the movie, like the current frame on the movie is always still and always unchanging, right? I'm going to quiet all of everyone here. All right, so feel free to unmute. But see, the moment itself, this magical moment, is the divine absolute, the absolute unchanging. I'm 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 projecting this as a possibility here, that the moment itself is the absolute unchanging. There's no change in the moment. The moment always is. And it's mind that takes snapshots of the moment. And so, like the movie, the current frame is unchanging, but it changes because the mind takes a snapshot of it. And when the next frame is snapped up there, they're different. And the mind explains that difference to you through movement, through change. And so we as egotistical beings, that's why we see movement, because we're always sitting on the last frame, the last snapshot that the mind took of the moment. And from that perspective, which has sets up an arrangement of thought in our mind, that previous snapshot, gets digested, sets the perception in the mind, and then the mind takes another snapshot of the moment again and sees difference, sees change. And so it takes those two frames of reference, and the mind explains that change through movement. So, in a sense, if you buy that uh, metaphor there, that's what's causing us to see a world of constant, unrepeating change. Is because we're actually living a split second in the past because we're ego identified.
Is that
We're looking at
also our sense of causality?
yes, yeah, and it's just a story. There, Nisargadatta says, cause and effect is only there because you set boundaries. Everything is a cause and everything is an effect simultaneously. You cannot, everything in the universe is as it is for this moment to be as it is. Everything in my room sits where it sits right now because everything else in the universe sits where it sits right now. There is no individuated cause and effect. He says that's an illusion. And to see it, all you have to do is take a look at something, see something set up as a cause and effect, and then broaden your time boundaries, and you begin to see that that ball didn't start there and it doesn't end there when you push it. So even though you can set up a diagram of cause and effect within a framework of time, a boundary time, then you can say, oh yeah, see, there's cause and effect. I hit the ball, it moves. See, I hit the ball, it moves. But then you bring it out a little bit, and you realize the ball makes the water splash. So now the ball has become an effect or cause, and the water splashing has been an effect. And then the water splashes out, it gets a napkin wet in the napkin shrivels. And so now you've got another set of cause and effect. And so everything is both a cause and effect at every moment in and of itself. And you can only tease out one by setting time boundaries before and afterward. And of course, time boundaries are mental. Time exists in the mind. Time is not an inherent truth. And so, we see, the Divine Mother is called time, because time is an intricate part of Maya, an intricate part of the power of God. And so, all of that. Yeah, so God is the all-doer, the Gyani is the non-doer, and our talker here is going to set up a grand question, almost a page long. So let's see where he's going. So the questioner, some Mahatmas, or enlightened beings, maintain that the world is neither an accident nor a play of God, but the result and expression of a mighty plan of work aiming at awakening and developing consciousness throughout the universe. Anybody have red flags going up already? From lifelessness to life, from unconsciousness to consciousness, from dullness to bright intelligence, from misapprehension to clarity, that is the direction in which the world moves ceaselessly and relentlessly. Okay, another red flag. We'll come back to if he doesn't. Of course, there are moments of rest and apparent darkness when the universe seems to be dormant, but the rest comes to an end and the work on consciousness is resumed. Now, here's the thing about this perspective. I'm not going to pick on his perspective because this is a very common idea. But look at that last statement. He says, there are moments when the universe seems to be dormant. Okay. How much of the universe does any particular person know that he could make a statement like the universe is dormant? So you see how careful we have to be, because you can get caught up in the mind and feel like you have an infinite perspective. But your mind is built on such tiny ideas, on such tiny little impulses, on such tiny little senses, on such a tiny fragment of experience. To actually, sit and to posit a universal truth from the amount of information you've got available to you is an absurdity, for one. And so, this kind of thinking, there are so many assumptions that the questioner has made already that are so much bigger than him or her as a person, that it's leading into this thinking. Okay, so we've got, some of the red flags. He's accepted God as working within time space causation. That's an iffy one, because time space causation belongs to the mind alone. We've got assumptions about meaning, about purpose. Purpose requires imbalance. So if you say that God is doing something for a particular reason, you are saying that God is not perfect, that God is not balanced, that all movement is a sign of imbalance. A tower falls until it's stable. And so that stability is assumed in Brahman. So Brahman is not doing. Brahman does not have a purpose for things. Brahman is principle. He's the noun of our Satchitananda, right? And any purpose is one that we create in our imbalance. So we see the world as purposeful because we are out of balance, because we do not know who we are. We have identified with that which is constantly out of balance, which is constantly falling, right? The tower of creation has not fallen completely yet, because it has not yet reached that moment of stability, right? That comes back to my father and my building blocks when I was, oh gosh, fourth grade, third grade. The blocks fell down and then they all stopped. And I wondered, why did they stop falling? So I asked my dad, who had just come in the playroom, why do blocks stop falling? How come they just don't keep falling? And my dad says, well, everything falls until it finds its most stable state, and then it stops. And so this is the fallacy of projecting truth outside the dream from inside the dream. And this is what's going on. We start to think this way about God when we think that God is inside the dream. When we forget God is the container of the dream, we believe God to be in the dream. And if he's in the dream, all of this could be true, right? But God is not in the dream.
So, Maharaj, wanted a clarification. Maybe that he's talking, how in Advaita we have the difference between the Ishvara and the Brahman, between the manifested God and the unmanifested God. And the manifested God has all this, right? It has the three, the creation that comes from, has this cycle of rest and play, and has the three gunas embedded in it. So when we use the word God in English, one can either take it as Brahman or one can take it as the manifested God. All right.
Yeah.
And so in the manifested, so in the manifested God, like when we say Brahma, or Vishnu or whatever, then all these things, what he's saying, may become true, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, from all perspectives, things can be true. You can say that the room is painted green if you're standing behind a screen and you believe it to be painted green. There's truth in what you're saying. You have a justification for it, but that justification may not be one that's reliable. I think what you're saying is true. We can just leave it at that. Although that's not really part of jnana. The personal God is not what they would be. I mean, he might be talking about it because he's confused.
Right, because I think mixing up the two, when Nisargadatta Maharaj is talking from the pure organic point of view, while he may be talking from the more acceptable point of view of God as a manifested God, as a personal God, and the story of creation, etc.
Right. And it's true. And if we were doing bhakti yoga, or if we were doing something along those lines, the devotion, we could totally just jump right into this, and it would be very comfortable. The problem is that he's talking to a jnani, and searching for that pure organic knowledge, and also confusing the whole stage by introducing untrue things into his question, and building a whole world on his wrong assumption as a jnani. Again, if he was in a different path, if we were in a different path, this would all be very helpful and very cool. But in the path of jnana, he's going to have lots of trouble because he hasn't sorted things out yet. He's still including lots of what a jnani would call ignorance into his assumptions. So,
thank you.
All right, sure, yes, no, but you're right, and I do appreciate that. They do not deny that the world. Okay, where are we? Question. From our point of view, the world is a dale of tears, a place to escape from as soon as possible and by every possible means. To enlightened beings, the world is good and it serves a good purpose. They do not deny that the world is a mental structure and ultimately all is one, but they see and say that the structure has meaning, serves a supremely desirable purpose. What we call the will of God is not a capricious whim of a playful deity, but the expression of an absolute necessity to grow in love and wisdom and power, to actualize the infinite potentials of life and consciousness. Just as the gardener grows flowers from a tiny seed to glorious perfection, so does God in his own garden grow among other beings, men to supermen, who know and love and work along with him. When God takes rest, pralaya, those whose growth was not completed become unconscious for a time, while the perfect ones who have gone beyond all forms and contents of consciousness remain aware of the universal silence. When the time comes for the emergence of a new universe, the sleepers wake up and their work starts. The more advanced wake up first and prepare the ground for the less advanced, who thus find forms and patterns of behavior suitable for their further growth. Thus runs the story. The difference, well, at least we're calling it a story, so that's that's a plus. The difference with your teaching is this: you insist that the world is no good and should be shunned. They say that distaste for the world is a passing stage, necessary yet temporary, and is soon replaced by an all-pervading love and a steady will to work with God. All right, again, Maharaj is saying, all that you say is right for the outgoing path, right? If you're stepping out through the senses and looking at the world, everything that you say is true, right? But you have to make all of the assumptions of what you're doing when you're stepping out into the world. You have to say that you are separate from God, right? You have to say that you're defined by cause and effect and by your place in time. And you're going to have to say that results are an important factor in what you're doing, right? So those are the assumptions if you're going to go out through the senses. For the path of return, right? So the path of going inward, knotting oneself is necessary, dismantling the ego. The ego is that block that makes you particular. So you have to knot oneself. You have to undo oneself. And this is done, again, through discernment. It's not done as a repression or a denial in that sense. It's done through a careful, intricate watching of your inner world, your inner life, so that you can see it unfold as it is. And you won't make that initial wrong assumption that you are X, Y, or Z, because that then changes every other assumption you make from that point forward. And so in the path of jnana, it's very important to really suspend your idea of self as best you can. Put it all on the questioner's burner. Don't don't accept anything that you think yourself to be is the best way to do it initially. And then as these statements come up, then slowly drag out what you thought yourself to be and compare them. And if they don't align, then he would, Sri Nisargadatta would say, we'll have a grand renunciation. Set that thing mercilessly on fire and adjust your sense of being, your sense of self. All right. So all that you're saying is right if you're going outward. The path of return, denying or undoing or resolving this false ego is necessary. My stand I take where nothing, paramakash, is, where nothing is. Words do not reach there, nor thoughts. So it's not something else. It's emptiness. It's full potential. It's the darkness of the night, pregnant with light, but nothing to reflect it. So it's just potential, just pure energy, no reflection, no manifestation. To the mind, it is all darkness and silence. Then consciousness begins to stir and wakes up the mind, which then projects the world, built of memory and imagination. Once the world comes into being, all you say may be so. It is the nature of the mind to imagine goals, to strive toward them, to seek out means and ways, to display vision, energy, and courage. These are divine attributes, and I do not deny them. But I take my stand where no difference exists, right? I set my sense of self in a place before all of this. I go to the very center of being before it shines through a mind, before it becomes a wave of identity, before it becomes a thought. I live. He's talking about dwelling in the mind at the source of thinking before the thinking happens. It's a great silence, but it's a powerful silence. It's not an absence. It's an everything, but unmanifest. So the power is extraordinary. The potential is infinite. So he says, these are all divine attributes, the things that you're saying, and I don't deny them. But I take my stand where no difference exists, where things are not, nor the minds that create them. There I am at home. Whatever happens does not affect me. Things act on things. That is all. Free from memory and expectation, I am fresh, innocent, and wholehearted. Mind is the great worker, and it needs rest. Needing nothing, I am unafraid. Whom to be afraid of? There is no separation. We are not separate selves. There is only one self, the supreme reality, in which the personal and the impersonal are one, right? So he's saying where this God that you're referring to and giving a perfectly fine oration about within the world of the senses, within the world of manifestation, that God and the God of which I am talking about, the God of pure potential, the God of the absolute unchanging, they're not different. They're not different, and you contain them both, but you're only living in one half, right? And so this is what brings it right down to the road. This is where all philosophy comes and becomes meaningful in the day-to-day life, because this is the important part to understand. You have both in you. The macrocosm and the microcosm, they're the same. And so you are one of the little fractal twists that all the other fractal twists are also playing all around you. It's a single fractal, single equation, a single principle, the God principle, which all of this is manifesting. And you have them both in you. At this moment, you have that absolute being, silence, pure potential. That's the shrine of the heart. That's the realization that is already yours and already fully developed in you and sitting there just unused, unrecognized, unnoticed as such. And then there's the other side of you, that Shakti side of you, the manifesting side of you, word for the Christians. And that is active mind. And that is manifesting the power of the divine, of God. It is the divine mother, right? And so you have both of these fully established within you, a whole universe of constant, unrepeating change, and an infinite point of absolute stillness, absolute peace, absolute love, absolute wisdom, full, perfect, unchanging. Both of them standing within you, right? Inseparable and yet perceived as two based on where you're putting your point of reference. See, that's what ego does. Ego takes you, the container of all, and gives you within that container of all a point. And what trouble that point causes. That point causes everything to have values. Plus and minus, good and bad, and all the dual throng start to exist because you've become a point in a singularity, in a wholeness. And so, so he's saying, I'm dwelling from a point beyond a point. I'm taking my stand as universal, as an unchanging absolute. I'm not identifying myself with the mind and body, with the constant flow of change. My identity is not sitting there. My identity is sitting before that in the silent chamber where I can't be touched. I can't be changed. I can't be moved. Nothing can happen to me. I am the supreme witness. And because of that non-attachment, I do not deflect the love of God into particulars. When God's love shines through me, it shines as a wholeness and it hits everything equally. It is not refracted by an idea of self being a particular. So there's no prisming of God through me. This is what he's saying. So the questioner says, well, all I want to be able to do is help the world. That's all I want to do. I just want to help the world. It's sweet, and there's credit for that, and it's beautiful, right? But if that was our only desire, we would have realization within 10 seconds. All of your delusions would fall to the ground if that was your one and only purpose. And that's where we're trying to get to, that one and only purpose, which of course could be talked about, helping the world continuously. You could talk about God as that. God is the one support, and so it is his everything that is everything. So all I want to do is to be able to help the world. Well, Maharaj says, well, who says you can't help? Go ahead, help. You made up your mind about what help means, what it needs, and you got yourself into a conflict between what you should and what you can, between necessity and ability, right? So that's a lovely desire. But look, it's going to cloud the whole ocean for you because you are starting with assumptions. You're starting with the assumption that the world needs help. And then you're moving on to the next assumption that you are able to help it. Both of them, when stated, you can see the immensity of the assumption, right? You can see the immensity of the assumption. So you made up your mind about what help means, what the world needs, and now you've gotten yourself into conflict between what you should do and what you can do, right? Because even with grand ideas in your mind, you're still 2 hands and 2 feet and a mouth. Go out and help the world. How help the world with 2 hands and a mouth? Okay. What will be the effect of that? Who knows? It really depends on the purity of the motive, is what he's going to get to also. So the questioner says, but why do we do so? Why is it like that? Why am I feeling this way then? Maharaj, your mind projects a structure and you identify yourself with it. It is in the nature of desire to prompt the mind to create a world for its fulfillment. It's a very good sentence. It is in the nature of desire. So the nature of your desire is to prompt the mind to create a world for its fulfillment. You see, so he's saying right there quite clearly, it is your desire that creates the world you live in. Right? Desire creates the world, one upon the other. That's why Thakur always talks about lust and greed, that all of this, Maya, fundamentally comes down to those 2 desires, lust and greed. And so any world of mind resolves into that selfishness, which seems like a pessimistic way of looking at it, but it's not, because that's not where it stops. Once you realize that the world you live in comes down to your expression of desire, then you're more willing to make that grand renunciation and to set it down and realize the best way to help the world is to dissolve your ego. And then by nature, you will serve the world. You won't help it. You'll serve it. You'll serve the self with the self in the self. And nothing will be done, but all of it will be of bliss and wisdom and an expression of being. All right. So it is the nature of desire to prompt the mind to create a world for its fulfillment. Even a small desire can start a long line of action. Prabhupada was great with this. He would never start anything new unless he had completely sussed out the implications, the cost of that, and that he was convinced that it was pure, you know. So he wouldn't start a class because he wanted one or thought one should happen. He would start a class when at least 3 devotees had asked for it, right? So he would always always take that route, and he was always very slow to answer because he was a listener. He listened at every level, and so you would ask him an urgent question. That urgency would not affect him. He would take the time it was going to take to make that decision wisely, even if the deadline passed. And it was quite an instructive existence working with him, to just see that happen, to see how he lived in a world of principle that wasn't going to be hurried, that wasn't going to be boundaried. And so, all right. Even a small desire can start a long line of action. So that's why you should be very careful about running after your desires, because it has long implications. If you make the assumption that desire is true, look at the things you have to assume about yourself in order to maintain a desire. And each time you fulfill a desire, you deepen those paths, those neural paths in your mind. That identity of self becomes deepened, right? Each time that you fulfill a desire. So that's what you should do. This is part of discernment. You feel a desire, fine. Now put that desire in your mind and look at it objectively. What assumptions am I making for this desire to exist? What assumptions about me am I making that make this desire seem true? And then look at the means of fulfillment. I am assuming that this desire is going to fulfill certain things. Does it do that? Is it lasting? Is it changing? You know, am I going to be right back at this well again tomorrow to fulfill this same desire all over again because the fulfillment evaporated? So it's this kind of discernment that leads us to the truth, right? This is what's happening. This exercise that we're watching between this apparent disciple and his apparent guru is actually the spiritual quest that's going on even within our own selves, right? Our active mind is maintained by a set of wrong assumptions. And by looking at those assumptions, trying to become aware of those assumptions, it will dismantle itself. So it's awareness that's key here. So even a small desire can start a long line of action. But what about a strong desire? Desire can produce a universe. Its powers miraculous. Just ask a small matchstick can set a huge forest fire. So does a desire light the fires of manifestation. The very purpose of creation is the fulfillment of desire. All right, wow, there's a statement. The very purpose of creation is the fulfillment of desire, which is exactly what the young man posited earlier, right? If we're going to accept the creation, that means we're stepping into the senses. So we're not taking Maharaja's absolute perspective anymore. If we're stepping into the creation, the very purpose of this creation is the fulfillment of desire, which is what? Its very purpose is to fall until it's stable. Right? The very purpose of this universe is simply to fall until it becomes stable, which means you can take his perspective earlier that he projected, that the purpose of the universe is to achieve this stability, to achieve this notion of oneness, to understand your true nature. So you can say that, or you can just say it's going to fall until it achieves balance. Or anytime that you take an imbalanced perspective, the world is going to look out of balance, and then you will see fall, whether or not it's actually falling, right? All right. The very purpose of creation is the fulfillment of desire. The desire may be noble or ignoble. Space is neutral. One can fill it with what one likes. You must be very careful as to what you desire, and as to the people you want to help. They are in their respective worlds for the sake of their desires. There is no way of helping them except through their desires. You can only teach them to have right desires, so that they may arise above them and be free from the urge to create and recreate worlds of desires, abodes of pain and pleasure. Right? A very important perspective there, that you can't really just reach in and give someone something in their world and change their world. You have to change a long succession of desires and karmas, that have been accumulated over time. So you're stepping into a raging river, with your cup of oatmeal, to help them in a way that you think you're helping them, but really in the great rage of their river of life, that's the thing, in Hollywood, I really, really, I was so exposed to homelessness. It was so pervasive everywhere. And you step into that and you want to help, you want to buy that piece of pizza, you want to give that dollar, you want to do that. But when you step into that stream, you're like, wow, this is not about a dollar. This is not about a meal. This is a mess. This is a real tangle, because very few people are homeless due to poverty alone. Very few, very few are in that situation purely because of poverty. It's like there's lots of assumptions and there's lots of worldviews in play that bring a person to that state of being, and so all of that has to be dealt with when you're coming up with a solution. All of that has to be seen. And really, at the end of the day, you kind of realize it's too big. It's too big. So it really comes down to an acceptance and a service on your part. An acceptance and a service. You don't do it for a reason. You do it because you're human. You do it because it's your nature to serve. And there will always be someone there to serve who, from your perspective, needs your service. Right? But in fact, it's always simply an opportunity of expression. It's always just an opportunity for you to manifest your nature. That's the only thing, that's the only pure way of living in this universe, right? Is to understand that every opportunity, every moment is just an opportunity for you to manifest what you are, your Sat Chit Ananda, to give expression to the unchanging absolute that you are. To provide an example for a principle. That's really what's happening. In this moment, you are the divine principle. You are the unchanging absolute, pure love, pure wisdom, pure being. And all this moment is another opportunity to express that. And to the level that you can freely express that, to that level, you're liberated. To that level, you know what you are. You're not trapped. Right? And so you understand when Peace Pilgrim says that every moment to her was an opportunity of service. That's all. That's how she saw her life. Every opportunity, she saw her as God's butler, herself as God's butler. That she was overseeing a large banquet of God's people, that he's invited to this banquet, and she would sit there silently as the butler in the background, watching intimately everything going on, waiting for the opportunity to serve. So that's how she lived her life. And that really is where Sri Nisargadatta is standing in a place where he's not taking a perspective, because that would limit his view, but he's seeing the whole. And then just as the opportunities, which that makes it sound like they're spurious and here and there, but really, of course, the moment is a constant opportunity of expression, right? So the body is putting off 98.6 degrees of heat all the time just by its nature of being a body, right? And so to live in this universe in a fulfilled and pain-free way, you do the same. your 98.6 is your Satchitananda. That's what's manifesting steadily from you in the moment, as the moment is, regardless of the moment. To know that is to find your contentment, because that is all you are, all that's necessary, and the only purpose. Right? And so it becomes an inspiration. Life becomes inspiration and not toil, not doing. It becomes communion and not service in that sense. So you can only teach them to have right desires. Well, that's why it's very difficult to teach an addicted person that to have right desires. Very difficult thing to do, because there's been a lot of reinforcement of wrong desires that have driven that very deep inside. And addiction can be like Eckhart Tolle, the addiction to thinking, the addiction to a noisy mind, the inability to be able to stop thinking. That also is the result of a desire, and that also is the cause of suffering. So you see, it's this we have to be able to suss things out, which is why we're called to a constant state of discernment, a constant state of awareness with what's going on inside. Oh, where did that come from? Oh, where is that going to take me? Oh, why? Do I really want to define myself that way? Do I really want to make that set of assumptions to support that desire? Are they true? Because see that if Eve in the Garden of Eden had stopped and said, wait, I'm already like God. I was created in his image. I already live with perfect wisdom and perfect love. Why would I need this thing of beauty to add anything to my life? If she had done that discernment, she would have looked at that snake and just been on whatever and walked on. And the Bible would never have been written. There would have been no need. And so for us in this moment, when desires and things that are pushing us, things that are compelling us to move, those are attachments. So it's good to look at them, and to change their nature so that they don't be compelling. They become inspiring, right? So that we see them, we make a commitment to the expression of our nature, and we do it for that reason. We don't do it for all of the other possible reasons, lesser reasons, hidden reasons. All right. Questioner: a day must come when the show is wound up. A man must die. A universe come to an end. Let me close my window because they're going to mow, it sounds like, next door here. Your inspiration. All right. So a day must come when the show is wound up. A man must die. A universe must come to an end. Yes, that's true, right? I mean, if you're going to have a beginning, if you're going to assume a beginning, you're going to have to assume an ending as well, as such. It's interesting. They say Maya has an end, but no beginning. That's because it never actually starts. It's always just an illusion. So nothing actually comes into being, but what ends is the ignorance. So the ignorance ends, but the ignorance never really had a beginning. All right, so a day must come when the show's finished. Maharaj: just as a sleeping man forgets all and wakes up for another day, or he dies and emerges into another life, so do the worlds of desire and fear dissolve and disappear. But the universal witness, the supreme self, never sleeps and never dies. Eternally, the great heart beats, and at each beat, a new universe comes into being. Right? That's immense. We could talk about that, but I mean, there's the words would be so small in next to that awareness. So just as a sleeping man forgets all and wakes up for another day, or he dies and emerges into another life, so do the worlds of desire and fear dissolve and disappear. But the universal witness, that part of you that never changes, that supreme self, never sleeps and never dies. Eternally, the great heart beats, and at each beat, a new universe comes into being. So this dance is forever, or exists in eternity. Let's put it that way. It exists within eternity. It's not going to go on forever because that's thinking in the dream about things outside the dream. But it's going on within eternity, which has its own implications to it.
So, Maharaj, would this be true of both the macrocosm and the microcosm? Because even like for us, if one was aware enough, each moment is a new universe, a new, a new way of, I don't know, living, and as well as the macrocosm.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, from this level, he's talking at a very high level, one that's almost dangerous to talk at because because the level of ignorance that I'm going to project on these statements. Yes, I mean but it's not a happening. I think it's not. It's yeah, you're right in what you're saying, and it is what we do come to realize. A realized soul has no history. A realized soul sees the moment as the whole. He doesn't put part of it in the past and part of it in the future, and then dabble with the little bit that's in his hands. He sees the continuity, the singularity of it, and the unmoving nature of it. And so that's why Nisargadatta is talking about, living in a place where nothing is happening, nothing is changing, nothing needs to be done. Nothing can touch him, nothing can affect him. So that's the enlightened self, that's the enlightened knowledge. And he steps into this world to talk about it. At that one point when the questioner asks him, can't you help me? And he says, I have helped you. I have stepped into your dream, right? So I've come out of my knowledge of myself I maintain, but I pretend for a moment the ignorance that you see as true. And I step into your dream and I'm telling you, you're sleeping. That's all that has to be done. Right? That's one of those worm hole things. You just drop that little piece of information into someone's head, like thou art that. That's another one of those. You just drop that statement into the head and that person is changed forever. That thought is going to bear fruit at some point. At some point, it will blossom. It's one of those seeds of thinking. And so just like when Nisargadatta says, I've stepped into your dream and I've told you what? I've told you you're sleeping. I don't have to tell you anything else about the nature of your dream, about what you're dreaming, about what you're experiencing. Whatever dream you're in, all you need to know is that you're dreaming. It's based on something unreal. Suss that out, and you will find your freedom. So just as a sleeping man forgets all and wakes up for another day, he dies and emerges into another life. So do the worlds of desire and fear dissolve and disappear. That's a great promise. No matter how bad your life is, no matter how much your suffering is, it's not forever. So that's a small comfort, but it is in fact a comfort. It does have an end. And if nothing else works, if it's really a day that bad, at least you can sit there and think, well, at 10 o'clock, I can go to bed. At 10 o'clock, I can go to bed. Eternally, the great heart beats, and at each beat, a new universe comes into being. Questioner, is he conscious? Maharaj, he is beyond all that the mind conceives. He can't be conscious because he's one without a second. For consciousness is awareness with objects in it, right? From his earlier description. And so for God to be conscious, there would have to be an eternal creation. There would always have to be objects in it. He would have to be within that frame of reference to see it, to be. Anyway, let me just shut up. If I say one more sentence, we're off in left field.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
All of this seems to me, it's like I'm seeing it from a Earth person point of view in eternity. I mean, does this kind of what we're going through here exists throughout eternity, or is this just a ball floating around out there where this, like, people like to say we're in a school, where we're in this particular school to learn something. I have a hard time separating the humanness of everything I read, see, think, or do from the concept of eternity, and how does those puzzle pieces fit? I don't know if it's making any sense, but
well, it makes sense for sure. The thing is that something like eternity, all you can do is put a placeholder for it in your mind. The mind cannot conceive of eternity. Mind. The only thing the mind can say of eternity, oh wow, that's a really long time. That eternity is not a really long time. Eternity is outside of time. So eternity can be both a split moment and a billion years at the same time.
Right.
Right. It's not a measure of time. Eternity is a statement of the absence of time. All right. And so we can't really conceive of that because time is one of the fundamental tools the mind uses in order to think. And so without time, it can't conceive. So we don't know what eternity is. We just know that it's not inherent to our nature. Right. And so when he says that the mind, God, this divinity, or the self, your true self, is beyond all that the mind can conceive, because the mind can only conceive of things that have a triad. We talked about this. It can only have subject-object relationship. That's one triad that the mind needs. The mind needs also time-space causation in order to conceive. So the mind has to have a triad in order to work. If something doesn't contain those three aspects of its triad, it simply cannot know them. It cannot know them. And so what this is our struggle, is that in this life, we're trying to use the mind in order to find truth. But the reality does not have the triad. And so we can dive endlessly into the mind, and the mind will continue to produce an endless number of reasons and possibilities and stories, but it cannot get out of its own container. That's why we talk about realization being transcendent. It means that you realize this and you pull your perspective out of mind, pull your identity out of mind, and suddenly, boom, the lights go on, but you can't say anything. You can't describe at all the solution, because to describe it, you would have to go back into the dream, and then you would run into the exact same problem. You couldn't describe anything that was going on because it doesn't have the triad necessary for the mind to process it. And so that's why Thakur was not able to tell us what he saw in samadhi. And of course, he had a more village way of saying that. He said, "Mother standing on my tongue." there's no way to say it.
So can you say in truth that there thus is, can you say, leave out the word truth, can you say that there is no solution because to try to change something messes it all up, or changes it anyway? But what is perfect, and
yes,
it should be left alone.
Yes. To understand, to know, not just to say, but to know the divine is everywhere present and always perfect. This is what the Buddhists are trying to reach through that idea of non-resistance, which is, and what the Christians are trying to get to through pure surrender, right? It means let go. Because to find a solution, you have to make one fatal assumption that there's a problem.
Yeah.
Right. And if you make your first assumption that there's a problem, and it's an assumption, you can't cure an assumption. You can only let go of an assumption or realize the assumption was inaccurate and let go. So again, it's an act of surrender, or renunciation. So yes, what you do is you live disinterestedly in this world, meaning that you understand your nature like Sri Nisargadatta is doing. You know that you're untouchable, that you cannot be affected by thought, you cannot be affected by circumstance or condition, that you are outside of all of that, that you are a container of this dream. You are not an actor in this dream. And when you begin to live in that space, you become a manifestation rather than an actor. You become a manifestation of your divine nature. And that really is the point of truth. That is what you are. And from that perspective, like Sri Nisargadatta, you can choose to step into ignorance to create a universe in which you can help. And, which is a great thing, as long as you live in the awareness that you can step out of that universe at any time also. Right? So that's the freedom of it. But on the day-to-day, it just means, it depends on your path. It means many things. It means see God everywhere, see your beloved everywhere, fall in love with everyone all the time. Be aware of your own fulfillment so that your desires don't start to lead you. Be aware that you need nothing. That even if you decided to stop eating completely today and stop drinking today, it would not be you that is affected. It would be the body that would be affected. And the opposite. Sit on the couch and weigh 450 pounds. It would not be you that is affected. It would be your body that's affected. Right? And so to know that is fine, but understand that it's not a neutral point. It's not a point where you just sit and let the body get immensely fat. That wouldn't happen because of the expression of your divine nature would come through. Right? If you were truly aware, you wouldn't overeat. If you were truly aware, you wouldn't undereat. If you were truly aware, everything would find its balance. Awareness is the balancing element. Awareness brings balance, brings awareness of balance. And so this is what we're trying to find. So it's 10:06. All right, let's end here for today.